So far, the best part of Woodward's book about Trump is when Secretary of Defense James Mattis threatened to kill Sean Spicer.
You don't have to be poor anymore. Jesus is here.
The loudspeaker spoke up and said, Christianity is stupid.
Greetings, fellow worker slaves, podcasting at 128 kilobits from the Fortress of Squalitude, not far from the redneck Mecca. This is the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast. I'm your host, Tucker. Professor Fuzznuts is in my lap demanding attention. Ash is curled up in my room somewhere. Yes, it's a podcast hosted by a guy and his cats. Get over it. This is a news show episode where I cover stories in the news that are related to things like atheism, secularism, science, or I find just plain interesting. Next episode will be a chapter or two from the Ethiopian Apocrypha. Okay, first things first, I want to thank Scott for becoming the latest person to support the show on Patreon. You and everyone else who supports the show help me keep a roof over my head and Fuzznuts and Ash and catnip. So, I want to thank all of you. As for work this past week, it was almost all 12-hour days again. Thursday morning, I got to leave after 11 and a half hours. Woohoo! But Friday morning, I got to leave after just 7 hours. You have no idea how happy I was to get out of there so early. I got home and was like, yeah, baby, my ass is crawling into bed and I'm going to sleep as long as I like. I slept for a whole 2 hours, woke up, and then couldn't get back to sleep until 1 p.m., which is when I've been getting to bed since I've been on these 12-hour days. I was less than amused. I did manage to get plenty of sleep, but even with that, I'm still sore from all the work I've been doing. It is rumored that we'll be dropping down to 4 days a week in the near future, which I will enjoy. I won't make as much money as I have been, but I'll still be doing better financially, and I'll have time to take care of things around the house. And honestly, I'm at about the point where if I can't get things straightened up around here, I'm liable just to set everything on fire and be done with it. In other news, I got my sample swag t-shirt for the show the other day, and there's a link in the show notes if you want to buy one to help support the podcast. It also came with a free sticker. The sticker's about 2 inches by 2 inches. That's roughly 5 centimeters by 5 centimeters for those of you in the civilized parts of the world. And, well, it looks like the show's album art. As for the t-shirt, it's 100% cotton. The print of the artwork is excellent, but I have to say that based on the one I got, the sizes seem to run a little small. In my salad days, when I was green and leafy and weighed a mere 135 pounds, that's about 62 kilos, I would wear a medium t-shirt. Now that I've ballooned up to 194 pounds, or 88 kilos, I wear a large, which is what I ordered. The shirt looks more like the mediums I have from when I was skinny than it does the larges I've been buying since I became a blubber factory. After washing, the printing on the shirt remained just fine, and the shirt didn't shrink, so if you're inclined to get one, I'd order at least one size larger. I'll have a picture of me wearing the shirt in the show notes so you can get an idea of what it looks like. My apologies for the strange expression on my face, but when I took the pic, my phone was showing the image reversed, and I was wondering if the actual photo was going to come out that way or not. It didn't. As for the fit of the shirt, my biggest complaint is that it's a little tight in the armpits. Other than that, it's pretty good. So if you get, like I said, a size larger, you should be okay. I am also happy to report that the folks who make the recording software that I use for Skype have pushed out an update which works. So you won't be subjected to just me during the next Apocrypha episode. The local Democratic Party had their monthly potluck this past week, but I couldn't go because, well, I kind of needed to sleep, what with having put in a 12-hour day. I did get some updates about what was discussed. The local head has resigned due to health issues, which was secretly met with much rejoicing. He wasn't seen as a very activist leader, and his replacement is a bit more serious about doing things. This is important for two reasons. One is that the race between Phil Bredesen and Marsha Blackburn for Senate has gotten very competitive, with the Republicans being concerned that Bredesen might win the election. This would help tip the Senate to the Democrats. Judging by the amount of negative ads I'm seeing online about presidents, I'd say that the Republicans were fucking scared. So we certainly need somebody being very active in this area to help get Bredesen elected. The other is because it's been discovered that there's a Republican mole in the state party. Some confidential information, which was actually false and had been planted in a conference call the party held with certain members, wound up in a Republican campaign ad. They are investigating to try and find the mole, but it's unlikely that they'll discover this person before the election. Even in a state that's as red as Tennessee, Republicans feel the need to play dirty. That is both encouraging and concerning. It's encouraging because it means they're worried enough about what the Dems are doing to spy on them. It's concerning because they've managed to get the person high enough in the organization that they have access to information general party members don't. Which is another reason why we need somebody in this area willing to be a little more activist, because perhaps they'll figure out who the spy is. We'll just have to see how it goes. I think that's everything of importance which has happened around here since the last episode, so let's get to the news.
Now you listen here. He's not the Messiah. He's a very naughty boy. Now go away.
From Salt Lake City Tribune.com. Billboards quoting Mormon scripture to support medical marijuana initiative reappear after temporary removal. A new billboard on the busy 600 South off-ramp of Interstate 15 on Thursday urged Utahns to vote for Proposition 2 to legalize medical marijuana by quoting the LDS Word of Wisdom, most famous for leading to the faith's ban on coffee, tobacco, and alcohol. The church itself is, of course, urging its members to vote against the ballot initiative. Exactly who paid for the ad attempting to use Latter-day Saint scriptures against the church's stand is a mystery, allowed because of an apparent loophole in Utah election law. Reagan Outdoor Advertising, and man, do you have to love the irony of that name in this instance, removed the ad temporarily Thursday to review that law, but the sign was back up on Friday. The billboard says, all wholesome herbs God hath ordained for the use of man. Doctrine and Covenants, 89:10, referring to Section 89 of the Doctrine and Covenants, a book of scripture of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I don't know about you, but I love it when folks use scripture to smack down the group that follows those scriptures. I haven't been able to find any poll numbers for how likely the initiative is to pass, but it appears that 10% of Mormons are willing to admit that they've used pot recently. Utah is said to have some of the highest rates of antidepressant use in the country, so it'll be interesting to see what happens if this measure passes. It would be hysterical if the whole state started mellowing out after the legalization of weed. I don't know if I have any Exmos who listen to the podcast, but there's an issue somewhat related to this that I've never gotten an answer for, and maybe one of you can provide it for me. In the Book of Mormon, or one of the Mormon books, authored by Joseph Smith, there's several verses which say something along the lines of, "You may drink wine made from the grapes of your own vineyard." To me, this sounds like it's saying it's okay to consume alcohol provided you make it yourself. Of course, knowing Joe, it could just be a covert way of saying you can bang your own kids. I'd be interested in hearing what the church's interpretation of those verses are. And we'll just have to see if Utah does join the civilized parts of the country and vote to legalize medical marijuana. Be the coolest thing that ever happened to that state, I do believe. From religionnews.com. Israeli court finds ultra-Orthodox radio station for banning women from the air. An Israeli district court has fined a radio station owned by ultra-Orthodox Jews 1 million shekels, or about $280,000, for its long-standing refusal to allow women to speak on its programs. The court's September 20 ruling was the culmination of a 2012 class action lawsuit filed on behalf of ultra-Orthodox women who had been denied the right to speak on the air at the station Kol Barama. The case was brought by Kolak, an Orthodox women's advocacy organization, and argued by lawyers from the Reform Movement's Israeli Religious Action Center. Iraq. That's weird. When it started broadcasting in 2009, Kol Barama banned all female voices from the air, claiming religious modesty rules required it. Kolak argued that the ban was discriminatory according to Israeli law and that it had no foundation in Jewish law. Yael Rockman, Kolak's executive director, told Religion News Service that the organization took on the lawsuit because ultra-Orthodox women themselves would be ostracized if they spoke against the ban. After the suit was filed, the station began allowing women on the air, but only to discuss feminine topics like cooking or education. They've increased the number, but don't allow women to sing because, that might give men boners. And to quote the inventor of the cornflake, John Harvey Kellogg, an erection is a flagpole on your grave. It's great that they've managed to smack the station down, but it's just ludicrous that in the 21st century we still have, people following this incredibly outmoded religious idea. Of course, following religion in the 21st century is really outmoded, but whatever. From livescience.com. Legends of a medieval female pope may tell the truth. Medieval legends claim that Pope Joan was the first and only female pope. And now, an analysis of ancient silver coins suggests that the ordained woman may have actually lived. According to legends from the Middle Ages, a pope named John, or Johannes Anglicus, who reigned during the middle of the 9th century, was actually a woman, Pope Joan. For instance, a story from the 13th century written by a Dominican monk from Poland named Martin claimed that Pope Joan became pregnant and gave birth during a church procession. However, there is much debate over whether a pope named Johannes Anglicus existed, much less whether this pope was a man or a woman. The doubt stems in part from the great deal of confusion over the identities of popes during the middle of the 9th century. For example, the oldest surviving copy of the Liber Pontificalis, the official book of biographies of popes during the early Middle Ages, Pope Benedict III is missing entirely, study author Michael Habicht, an archaeologist at Flinders University in Adelaide, Australia, told Live Science. Habicht is basing his claim on some old coins which were found that have markings on them indicating that they were minted when Johannes Anglicus was pope. If true, this would be the first real indication that there actually was a pope, Johannes Anglicus, but would not prove that he was indeed a woman or that she gave birth. And yes, I'll admit that the story's a little clickbaity. However, I find it interesting that the records of the church, which claims to trace its founding to the Apostle Peter, are so sketchy about who was running the show, even as late as the Middle Ages. You'd think that a bureaucratic organization like the church would have better record keeping than that. After all, regardless of who started the thing, they learned organizational skills from the Romans, who were really good at keeping records. Which is why, not finding any mention of Jesus being crucified is so strange. Now, not that I think that it would change anything if conclusive proof that there was a Pope Joan was found. The Church has a long history of quietly ignoring actions by previous popes that go against Church teachings. After all, they're not exactly known for discussing the various popes who've had wives, mistresses, and children. They don't deny them, but do the old jingly keys routine when such matters are raised. I'll have a link to an article in the show notes which touches on both Pope Joan and a number of popes who were more than happy to get their freak on.
Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
Asps. Very dangerous. You go first.
From ScienceAlert.com. Archaeologists think they found the world's oldest brewery, and it predates agriculture. Archaeologists working in Israel have uncovered what they think is the world's oldest brewery, which may have been producing booze as far back as 13,700 years ago. Anyone who enjoys a tipple owes these people a lot. The new find predates evidence of previous beer making by several thousand years. This could mean human beings were cooking up alcohol much earlier than we thought. Not only that, but the researchers think this could be evidence that the domestication of some cereals, meaning efforts to purposely cultivate crops, may have been prompted by the need to keep the beer flowing, at least in certain parts of the world. This accounts for the oldest record of human-made alcohol in the world, as opposed to tiger-made alcohol. Says one of the team, Li Liu from Stanford University in California. This discovery indicates that making alcohol was not necessarily a result of agricultural surplus production, but it was developed for ritual purposes and spiritual needs, at least to some extent prior to agriculture. Not mentioned in the article is that there's evidence humans were engaging in agriculture 20,000 years ago, which you might remember my covering on an earlier episode of the podcast. So this latest discovery doesn't really answer the question of which came first. And I imagine that it's probably wrong to think of ancient history, as most of us do, with something like agriculture being developed in one area and then spreading from there. It probably developed in many different areas independent of one another, and in some of those areas, production of alcohol will predate agriculture, while in others it will postdate it. And it is hotly debated which came first. There is some speculation that alcohol was discovered by people who had gathered grain and were traveling. The stuff got wet and fermented naturally on its own, and they being desperate for food, they ate what they had and got drunk, and it's like, whoa, this is pretty fun. We need to do this more often, and then that led to the development of agriculture. And there are, of course, others who say, no, it was only after humans settled to start growing grain, etc., that they, had the accident that led to the development of alcohol. From LiveScience.com. The world's oldest known drawing is a 73,000-year-old hashtag. A small rock flake no larger than a house key is covered with a colossal surprise, the first known drawing ever made by human. Some human, or humans, Homo sapiens, used a red ochre crayon to draw a hashtag-like design on a rock flake in what is now South Africa about 73,000 years ago, said the researchers who analyzed the doodle. It is unclear what the crisscross lines mean, but similar designs have been found at other early human sites in South Africa, Australia, and France, said study senior researcher Christopher Hinchelwood, director of the Center for Early Sapiens Behavior at the University of Bergen in Norway. It seems to be part of the human repertoire of producing signs, Hinchelwood told Live Science. Archaeologists discovered the 1.5-inch long, 3.8 centimeters, rock flake in Bolombo's Cave, an archaeological site on the coast of South Africa, about 185 miles, 300 kilometers, east of Cape Town. The cave is famous for its Middle Stone Age artifacts, including shell beads and engraved stone tools that were left by humans who lived there between 100,000 and 70,000 years ago. While hard to see in the photograph, it's pretty obvious that the lines were deliberately made. And while I doubt that we'll ever know the purpose behind the lines, it'd be funny if they were the Stone Age equivalent of trying to see if one's pen was working. From BBC.com, Egyptian archaeologists find Sphinx at Aswan Temple. Egyptian archaeologists had discovered a statue of a sphinx while drawing water from the pharaonic temple of Kom Ombo near the southern city of Aswan. The Antiquities Ministry said that the statue of the mythical beast, which measures about 28 centimeters, 11 inches wide, and 38 centimeters tall, and notice they don't give the inches for that, was made of sandstone. It probably dates back to the Greco-Macedonian Ptolemaic dynasty, which ruled Egypt from 305 BC until 30 BC. Two sandstone reliefs of King Ptolemy V were also recently found at the temple. After the coronation of Ptolemy V, who ruled from 210 BC until 180 BC, priests at the sacred city of Memphis issued the famous Rosetta Stone, which listed his noble deeds. Many centuries later, the stone helped experts learn to read ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. The temple of Kom Ombo, where the Sphinx was found, was built during the reign of his son, Ptolemy VI. It hosted the twin gods Sobek and Hauresis. And those are two gods I've never heard of. Looking it up. Sobek is the crocodile god of Egypt, and Haureus, I guess that's how his name is one of the oldest forms of Horus, was derived from a combination of the falcon god with an indigenous deity, Ur, the Great One, a god of light. So that answers that. The statue is remarkably well preserved and gives a hint as to what the giant Sphinx we're all familiar with might have looked like when it was new. I think it's pretty neat that we're still turning up things even in well-explored temples. And that area has been well churned over by researchers, because they did a lot of work in that area when they built the Aswan Dam. Egypt went to the rest of the world and said, "Hey guys, we got to have this dam to generate electricity, and it's going to flood this area with all these historic artifacts. So if you don't want them underwater, cough up some money and we'll move them to higher ground." So that's what they did. And while this temple is not, part of the area that was submerged, I'm sure that they would have gone over that area pretty thoroughly back in the 50s when they were doing the dam to make sure they got as much as they could when they were moving the temples and other artifacts that would be submerged.
Ah, Kirk, my old friend. Do you know the Klingon proverb that tells us revenge is a dish that is best served cold? It is very cold in space.
From phys.org, new research suggests Pluto should be reclassified as a planet. The reason Pluto lost its planet status is not valid, according to new research from the University of Central Florida in Orlando. In 2006, the International Astronomical Union, a global group of astronomy experts, established a definition of a planet that required it to clear its orbit, or in other words, be the largest gravitational force in its orbit. Since Neptune's gravity influences its neighboring planet Pluto, and Pluto shares its orbit with frozen gases and objects in the Kuiper Belt, that meant Pluto was out of planet status. However, in a new study published online Wednesday in the journal Icarus, UCF planetary scientist Phil Metzger, who is with the university's Florida Space Institute, reported that this standard for classifying planets is not supported in the research literature. Ooh, nerd fight. Metzger, who is lead author on the study, reviewed scientific literature from the past 200 years and found only one publication from 1802 that used the clearing orbit requirement to classify planets, and it was based on since disproven reasoning. He said moons, such as Saturn's Titan and Jupiter's Europa, have been routinely called planets by planetary scientists since the time of Galileo. The IAU definition would say that the fundamental object of planetary science, the planet, is supposed to be defined on the basis of a concept that nobody uses. Wow, that's a weirdly written sentence. The IAU definition would say that the fundamental object of planetary science, the planet, is supposed to be defined on the basis of a concept that nobody uses in their research. It's so awkwardly written, Metzger said, and it would leave out the second most complex, interesting planet in our solar system. We now have a list of well over 100 recent examples of planetary scientists using the word planet in a way that violates the IAU definition, but they are doing it because it's functionally useful, he said. It's a sloppy definition, Metzger said of the IAU's definition. They didn't say what they meant by clearing their orbit. If you take that literally, then there are no planets because no planet clears its orbit. If this does manage to get Pluto reclassified as a planet, then it'll probably also get Ceres reclassified as a planet as well, since they're saying the main definition is that any body large enough that its gravity causes it to form a sphere should be considered a planet. That would make our moon a planet. But when the asteroid Ceres was first discovered, it too was considered to be a planet. This designation was later dropped because of its small size. That would raise the number of known planets in the solar system to 10. There is almost certainly another giant planet in the Kuiper Belt, as observations of various bodies in the belt seem to indicate that their orbits are being disturbed by a large mass. It has been dubbed, as all potential planets are, as Planet X. If found, we'd then have 11 planets in the solar system. So, to update the old mnemonic for the planets in the system, we could have something like this. My very excellent mother creatively just served us 9 pizzas, Zyveria. Which works pretty well, I think. At least until they come up with a name for the last planet. From space.com. Mysterious light flashes are coming from deep space, and AI just found more of them. Last year's mysterious outburst of deep space light flashes was even more frenzied than previously thought, a new study reports. On August 26, 2017, astronomers with the Breakthrough Listen project, a $100 million effort to hunt for signs of intelligent life, spotted 21 repeating light pulses called fast radio bursts, emanating from the dwarf galaxy FRB, within the span of 1 hour. Some scientists think FRBs come from fast rotating neutron stars, but their source has not been nailed down. and that explains Breakthrough Listen's interest. It's possible that the bursts are produced by intelligent extraterrestrials, perhaps to blast space-sailing craft through the cosmos at incredible speeds. Some folks have speculated Breakthrough Listen's sister project, Breakthrough Starshot, is developing a laser-based light-sailing system that aims to launch tiny probes toward alien solar systems in the next 30 years. And FRB 121102, which lies about 3 billion light-years from Earth, is particularly intriguing. It's the only known repeater source of FRBs, which otherwise tend to be one-offs. I'm not about to get excited over this, because I have a feeling it'll turn out to be some kind of natural phenomena rather than aliens. I do think that it's interesting something as powerful as these have a source which we haven't been able to figure out yet. There also don't seem to be any coming from within our own galaxy. There's probably a couple of reasons for this. One could be that we're looking in the wrong direction to see them. Another is that there's something about the conditions in our galaxy which prevent them from happening. And a third possibility, one which I'll admit is probably remote, but I'll bring up because it ties with the idea of them being produced by intelligent life. The theory is sometimes called the Great Filter, in that as a species advances, they hit certain inflection points where if the species doesn't make radical changes to its behavior, it goes extinct. The development of nuclear weapons was often cited as such an inflection point during the Cold War, and now people are pointing to such things like global warming as another inflection point. And the theory continues and says basically, because of the Great Filter, you only end up with one intelligent species in a galaxy. Everybody else just wipes themselves out. So, that would mean that we're at a point where, nobody in this galaxy has advanced to that level of development, and or they've wiped themselves out before they've gotten there, and we may be the only species around that could do it if we don't wipe ourselves out. Now, the reason why I say that this is probably a natural phenomena and not aliens using solar sails or whatever is because any technology actually used by a species to spread beyond their home solar system is probably going to function at a level far beyond anything we can imagine. So if we spot something and think, that looks like it could be aliens with solar sails, we're probably wrong. To put it another way, while the ancient Greek philosophers could have certainly talked about traveling to the moon, there's no way that they could have conceived of the massive technological requirements involved in such an undertaking. Remember, rockets hadn't even been invented yet. They had only the barest understanding of how the human body worked, no concept of vacuum, or even that it would be necessary to have a heat shield to protect craft returning from the moon. If they would have thought about traveling to the moon, it probably would have involved ships which looked very much like the sailing vessels they were familiar with, and they would have been carried aloft by giant birds or something similar. Not giant machines made of metals they'd never heard of and involving things like radio or other inventions. And I have a feeling that any craft capable of interstellar travel will be as so far advanced over a Grecian sailing ship as an Apollo rocket was, that, we can't comprehend it now. And even in the decades leading up to the moon landings, our science fiction authors got aspects wrong of what the first trips to the moon would be like. I'm not talking about hacky pulp writers who had no understanding of science. Guys like Asimov, Heinlein, Clarke, and Bradbury all screwed up. In none of their stories are accounts or even mentions of sending robotic probes to the moon or other planets first to see what conditions would be like before they sent people. Nope. Somebody decides they want to go to the moon or Mars, they build a giant rocket, stick people on it, and off they go. No doubt it seemed logical to them back then. After all, if you've got the technology, why waste time with robots when you can send people. Unrealized in that thought process is that you need to have some idea of what conditions on the ground are going to be like before you send people there if you want them to survive. And even with all the advanced work that NASA did in preparation for the Apollo missions, they still got things wrong in some cases. A couple of the landings were tricky because the spots picked to land turned out to be rougher terrain than originally thought. So I think that it's reasonable to believe our assumptions about what alien technology would look like when it comes to doing things which we can't yet do are potentially equally as wrong. From skyandtelescope.com, Super Earth discovered in fictional Vulcan system. Almost 3 decades ago, Gene Roddenberry, producer of the Star Trek universe, wrote a letter to Sky and Telescope along with Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics astronomers Sally Baliunas, Robert Donahue, and George Nasiopoulos. In their letter to the editor, they argued that 40 Eridani A, an orangish star 16 light-years away, would make the ideal home for Vulcan, the home planet of science officer Mr. Spock. Now, a new discovery puts a little more science into that science fiction assertion. That discovery is a planet twice the size of the Earth. It also has an orbit smaller than that of Mercury. So it's pretty close to the star. Too close for life to form on the planet in all likelihood. However, if there's one planet, there's likely to be others, and one of them might have life on it. Obviously, they wouldn't be Vulcans, but since we're a stupid species, we'd probably just call them Vulcans and annoy the fuck out of them, asking about Spock to the point where they decided they had no choice but to wipe us all out.
Tea Earl Grey, hot.
From the NewYorkTimes.com, Cody Wilson, 3D printed gun proponent, is arrested in Taiwan on sex assault charge. Cody Wilson, a leading proponent of 3D printed guns, has been arrested in Taiwan after being charged in Texas with sexually assaulting a 16-year-old girl, their Taiwanese officials said on Friday. The police arrested Mr. Wilson in the Wanhua district of Taipei and delivered him to the National Immigration Agency, officials in the city said. The police in Austin, Texas, said on Wednesday that Mr. Wilson had failed to board a flight back to the United States from Taipei and that they had asked the United States Marshals Lone Star Fugitive Task Force for help finding him. The Marshals will return Mr. Wilson to Austin authorities after he returns to the United States, the Austin Police Department said Friday. He had not been charged when he went to Taiwan, so he's not considered to have fled the country. This will certainly derail some of his efforts to make 3D printed guns commonplace, but I have no doubt that some other idiot will take up the mantle. It's not discussed in this article, but it is discussed in another article which I can't find right now. Anyways, dude's been running a company that gets around the loophole in the ruling. The ruling against him said that he could not upload those plans to the internet. So what he's been doing is selling USB sticks with the plans on them to people. And nobody knows what the hell's going to happen with his business. I'm sure that the plans have already ended up on the torrent sites, so somebody can get it that way. And he's going to be other people are going to be taking these plans and tweaking them and improving them just because they can. I'm reminded of what happened when the encryption algorithm PGP was developed by RSA. The government immediately says, no, this is a weapon. You guys can't export this or anything like that. So, the software could only be used within the United States, and the code was not allowed to be sent out of the U.S., but of course it did get sent out because it was not done. They wrote the code and emailed it to somebody, or they hand wrote it and mailed it in a traditional letter, which allowed the code to leave the U.S. without violating the law because it wasn't actually being used in a program. When DVDs first started to be sold, the Linux users wanted to be able to play DVDs on their computer. Well, the government says no, because the Linux is an open source platform, so it violated. The government claimed that if a Linux program was capable of decoding a copy protected DVD, it was in violation of, yes, Fuzznuts, copyright laws, and so they were not allowed to put the code in any of the programs. However, the actual code was so small that it could be easily printed on a t-shirt. So that's what they did. They printed it on a t-shirt, and lo and behold, sold them all over the world, and Linux users got to watch DVD movies on their computers. So, this is, as I said before when the topic came up, there, in the U.S. at least, there's got to be a societal solution to this, because the technological issues involved are becoming so simple for anyone to get a gun that, we have to do something to make gun ownership less popular. There's a group that I'm in where, when the story broke about the guy, saying, hey, I'm going to upload the files, blah, 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 there was a dude who's like, oh, this is fan-fucking-tastic. People all over the world will be able to have a gun to defend themselves. It's like, dude, most people don't feel the need to have a gun to defend themselves. So you need to ask yourself why we in America feel that the only way you can defend yourself is by owning a gun. So this is going to be a continuing story, I'm sure.
She blinded me with silence.
LATimes.com. Wind and solar farms can make their own weather, including extra rain over the Sahara. You already know that using solar and wind power can influence the climate by reducing our dependence on heat-trapping fossil fuels. Now scientists say these renewable forms of energy can change the climate more directly and do it in ways that might surprise you. If wind turbines and solar panels were deployed across the Sahara, more rain would fall and more plants would grow in the massive African desert, according to research published in Friday's edition of the journal Science. Renewable energy can have multiple benefits for climate and sustainable development, wrote a team led by researchers from the University of Maryland's Department of Atmospheric and Oceanic Science. To figure this out, the researchers imagined 3 scenarios for the Sahara and the Sahel, a semi-arid region immediately to the south. In one, the area is studded with wind turbines that stand more than 300 feet high. In another, solar panels cover 20% of the land. The third case combines wind and solar farms, a setup that would produce about 82 terawatts of electrical power. That's far more power than the world currently needs, said study co-leader Yan Li. Once their hypothetical energy farms were built, the researchers fed the details into a sophisticated computer program that simulates Earth's dynamic climate. Then the program made predictions about how the farms would change the environment. Now, as the article goes on, it gets kind of misleading, and I have a suspicion, though I'm not sure, that whomever wrote the article didn't understand what they were talking about to some degree. Because here's what would happen. It would change the environment such that it would increase rainfall in certain areas. The solar farms would do the most to increase the rainfall, and this would encourage more plants to grow in the area. Now, the article says a side effect of this would be it reduces the area's albedo. Well, you actually don't want the albedo of the Earth to go down. because that's what it's doing right now due to all the melting ice. The albedo is the amount of sunlight that is reflected from a planet. And while green plants do, absorb more sunlight than they reflect and thus help hold heat in, there would be a tremendous offset in carbon emissions, not merely from the fact that, we've, gotten rid of a bunch of fossil fuel emitting or, fossil fuel plants when we put in the solar panels, but those plants would absorb carbon dioxide out of the air. Now, one thing I have found out, which astounds me, is nobody knows which plants absorb the most CO2. You'd think we would have figured that out by now, but I checked a while back because I was like, well, what plants absorb the most CO2? I'll see if if there's something that can grow in this area, I'll put them in the yard and, try and make a little dent and maybe see about, working with local organizations to plant more of them. And I Google around and it's like nobody knows. Nobody has figured this out. What plants absorb the most CO2? But, so, there would be some local climate change caused by these solar panels. It would be a little warmer in the area and a little wetter. In some areas, it'd be a lot wetter. But the benefits, of having more plants to absorb CO2 in a large area, a lot less CO2 emissions by industrial operations would clearly offset any mild increase in the temperature in that local area. The numbers I have seen for it's what's known as a solar thermal plant, where they use concentrated sunlight to boil water to run turbines. An area of the Sahara Desert 100 miles by 100 miles square covered with a solar thermal farm would generate enough power to meet the world's current needs, even accounting for periods of darkness and clouds when the solar panels were, the solar farm was producing less energy. And they have, I forget who did it. Somebody built a pilot plant out in the western U.S. and whoever engineered it knew exactly what the hell they were doing, because the plant could be assembled with literally just a handful of common hand tools, not any specialized equipment or anything like that. You could go basically to your local hardware store if you didn't happen to have the right size wrench and a few other odds and ends and put one of these suckers together. And as I recall, they got the project up and running and a demonstration project improved everything during W's administration. Then, of course, once it was proved, the government cut the funding to the project. It's stupid. But the other thing this article kind of hints at but doesn't really discuss is there's going to be environmental changes. You suddenly turn a desert green. Well, what about all the creatures that normally live in the desert and don't like living in a lush green forest area? That could be a problem. But then again, that's less of an issue than the entire planet overheating, which is where we're headed now. From Gizmodo.com. Extraordinary evidence suggests 558 million year old fossil is the oldest known animal on the planet. An international team of researchers is claiming to have discovered traces of cholesterol on a fossil of Dickinsonia, a mysterious creature that lived during the primordial Ediacaran period. This evidence, the researchers say, makes Dickinsonia the oldest known animal in the fossil record. But the discovery is not without its critics, who say the new work is unconvincing. Is it or is it not an animal? This is the question that scientists have been asking for decades about Dickinsonia. Measuring as much as 4 feet long, 1.4 meters, and featuring rib-like segments that ran along its oval-shaped body, this enigmatic organism dates back to the Ediacaran 571 million to 541 million years ago, a period that immediately preceded the Cambrian, a time when animal life exploded in terms of diversity and number. New research published today in Science suggests Dickinsonia was a true animal and not a fungus, plant, or protozoa, single-celled organisms, as previously suggested. The evidence used to support this claim is nothing short of extraordinary. Cholesterol molecules found within a 558 million year old Dickinsonia fossil from near the White Sea in northwest Russia. The researchers, led by Ilya Bobrovsky from the Australian National University, believe the cholesterol, a type of fat, was produced by the individual when it was alive, and because cholesterol can only be produced by animals, Dickinsonia is thus deserving of the animal designation. Pretty cool. The photo of the fossil looks kind of like a thumbprint, really. That's what this thing basically the fossil looks like. So, it could have been a plant, but I doubt if it was a protozoa, since it was such a big fossil. The largest single-celled organism living today is about the size of a grape, and it lives on the bottom of the ocean in the Caribbean, if I'm not mistaken. For years, I guess, people surveying the bottom of the ocean had noticed these weird tracks and couldn't figure out what they were. And then somebody spotted these round balls rolling along on the ocean floor, and they were making the tracks. So naturally, they scooped some up and cut them open and discovered they were a giant single-celled organism. And it's also possible this could be like that. And in a way, the fossil does kind of look like the shape of this. I guess it's like a sea slug, and it's actually sort of half plant, half animal, because it will eat plants like algae and use the chlorophyll that they have to generate energy to, keep it alive when it can't find food. So maybe it was something like that. I don't know. Nature.com. A discovery of Galileo's long-lost letter shows he edited his heretical ideas to fool the Inquisition. It had been hiding in plain sight. The original letter, long thought lost, in which Galileo Galilei first set down his arguments against the Church's doctrine that the sun orbits the Earth, and has been discovered in a misdated library catalog in London. Its unearthing and analysis exposed critical new details about the saga that led to the astronomer's condemnation for heresy in 1633. The 7-page letter, written to a friend on 21 December 1613 and signed G.G., provides the strongest evidence yet that at the start of his battle with the religious authorities, Galileo actively engaged in damage control and tried to spread a toned-down version of his claims. Many copies of the letter were made, and 2 different versions exist. One that was sent to the Inquisition in Rome, and another with less inflammatory language. But because the original letter was assumed to be lost, it wasn't clear whether incensed clergymen had doctored the letter to strengthen their case for heresy, something Galileo complained about to friends, or whether Galileo wrote the strong version and then decided to soften his words. Galileo did the editing, it seems. The newly unearthed letter is dotted with scorings out and amendments, and handwriting analysis suggests that Galileo wrote it. He shared a copy of the softened version with a friend, claiming it was his original, and urged him to send it to the Vatican. Now, apparently what happened is Galileo sent the letter to his friend and then said, no, give me that back. I need to change it. And then he changed the text to make it, less inflammatory. So instead of saying, well, the sun actually the earth actually goes around the sun, he says, it appears that the earth moves around the sun. And then he, tried to get that letter accepted by the Vatican, but by that point in time, it was already too late. They had decided, you're saying things we don't agree with. See, and I had been told by a history professor I had in college that the attitude of the Catholic Church at the time really was, yeah, Galileo, our own observatory has matched, agree, their observations agree with yours, but we don't think the general public is ready for this, so we don't want it discussed. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. She wasn't exactly the greatest history teacher I've ever had. But, it does show that Galileo was trying to get his ideas put forth in a way which would be acceptable to the church. And it's just another illustration of why religion needs to stay out of science and politics.
You bring them death, and they will love him for it.
Okay, now about the tale I told at the very beginning of the episode, if you can remember, all the way back to then, where I said that, Secretary of Defense James Mattis threatened to kill Sean Spicer. Here's the details according to Woodard's book. Spicer is an able reservist, and when he was press secretary, he kept trying to get Mattis to go on the Sunday morning talk shows. Mattis refused. And he kept at it, and Mattis finally told Spicer, I've killed people for a living. If you ask me again, I'm fucking sending your ass to Afghanistan. Which makes it pretty clear that, he wouldn't see to it that Spicer ended up in a rough part of Afghanistan where the odds were not in his favor. I suppose that's terrible and all, but damn, I find that funny. I have not finished Woodard's book yet. I'm about halfway through it, and a lot of it is stuff that has been rumored. A lot of it is stuff that you may not have heard about, but it certainly comes as no surprise. I will say the opening chapters, I absolutely positively hope that the Democratic Party is reading that book and taking the right lessons from it, because it lays out, without explicitly saying it, but to me it was freaking obvious, how Trump managed to win. And I mean, as far, excluding the whole, Russian hacking thing, but what factors enabled him to get the nomination and stuff like that. Steve Bannon was crucial to Trump staying in after the Access Hollywood tape was released. Everybody else wanted to back off and say, you just apologize, we'll let Pence take the slot, the presidential slot, and we'll even get Condi Rice to come in. They had Condi Rice and a couple others who were more than happy to be VP. They figured that would be a really good choice and, get the vote back that Trump might have lost. Bannon says, you're not going to fucking do that. And Trump liked that. Trump does not like the idea of apologies. As I've said before, Trump's mentor was Roy Cohn, and Roy Cohn's attitude was, if somebody sues you, you file 10 lawsuits against them. Sort of like the scene of The Godfather where he says, they put one of yours in the hospital, you put two of theirs in the morgue. So that's that. So Trump really liked Bannon saying, "Oh yeah, we'll go with this." Bannon didn't like the apology. Trump didn't like the apology that he made after it. Bannon also is very wary of Melania. He apparently calls her the Hammer and thinks that she is very good at spotting bullshitters. Which makes you wonder why she married Trump. But then again, maybe not. Trump, there's, I know that Noah has said it's a very deferential book towards the Trump administration. I'm assuming he's read the whole thing and seen something in it that I haven't, because I don't really see it as being all that deferential at this point. But it definitely shows Trump does not care about an awful lot of things that he should care about as president. It is definitely well worth reading. I think, because if you did not have, if you one of those people who look at Trump and I don't understand how his mind works, this shows a lot. It shows that there's constant frustration with the staff about how inept he really is and how much they struggle with trying to get him to do even the basic stuff that he needs to do. And that whole New York Times op-ed that, they say, people have come out and said, it was a hoax or blah, blah, blah. The letter that they're talking about is what, the letter that they say, we just pulled it off of Trump's desk. That opens the book. He reprints that. He also reprints some documents that have Trump's own handwriting on them, so that they're legit. And Trump has no concept of foreign trade. He says trade is bad. That doesn't mean trade deficits are bad. Trade internationally is bad. He clearly doesn't, he doesn't understand any of the shit. And Bannon was able to manipulate him because Bannon feels the same way and understands that mindset. There's a scene in the book where they're, trying to get Trump to extend the Iran deal. And, they're talking about the importance of supporting our allies and things like that, and how our allies have our back. And Trump asked, if we slap sanctions on Iran, are our allies going to support us? And they're like, no, that's a stupid fucking idea. And Bannon's like, see, NATO, all these guys, they're for shit. So that just, that was exactly what Trump wanted to hear. Boldness and bluster. He loves that shit. And so do his followers. And as I record this, news is breaking of at least 2, possibly 3 more women coming forward saying that they were attacked at parties by Kavanaugh. I am not going to make any claims about those women's statements because I haven't looked into the matter at all. Really, I haven't had time. As for Dr. Ford's claims, they certainly sound believable to me. I have known several women who've described, being attacked at parties. I even know one woman who has a story almost exactly like Dr. Ford's, except for the fact that she was not lucky enough to escape. So it is definitely plausible that it in fact happened. And I do think that there should be time taken to further investigate this matter, but the Republicans are unwilling to do that because they're probably worried more shit is going to come out about Kavanaugh. There is apparently in the legal profession a mindset that thinks guys like Kavanaugh, whatever their flaws may be, make great lawyers because they are so sexually aggressive. There was, I don't know if he still has a site up or not, and I'm not going to waste time to look for it. There was a blogger who went by the name Tucker Max, who he was a law student when he started it and would brag about his various sexual exploits. And people kept telling him, you don't want to do this because when it comes time for you to graduate and get a job, this is going to haunt you. Supposedly, at least according to him, that when he did graduate, because of his blog where he regaled everyone with his conquests, he got multiple offers from very high-powered law firms. General Patton rather famously has said that any man who won't fuck won't fight. So that's an idea of the mentality. And there are plenty of people out there saying, well, Kavanaugh should, or the GOP should pull Kavanaugh's name for consideration. Let me read to you something posted in a group I'm in by a guy who claims that he didn't vote for Trump, doesn't really like Trump, but, always just seems to have to pop up and support Trump at, every opportunity. This is what he said about the idea of the GOP pulling Kavanaugh's name. I tell you right now that they can't and shouldn't. It's all bullshit, and Kavanaugh has not been accused of multiple rapes. The reason they can't, the moment Kavanaugh is ejected from the process is the moment you see a real blue wave in the country, because a majority of Republicans already pissed off at the GOP because the GOP is viewed as weak and not willing to fight will just say fuck it and stay home on Election Day. The House, already in danger, will be a greater loss than it would be. The Senate, that will flip to Democrats. Trump, one of his key things that people love about him is that he will fight tooth and nail. That's what people want from the Republicans in Congress. Don't give it to them on Kavanaugh, and the GOP can kiss 2018 goodbye. Now, I will again flog that dead horse of Hoffer's book, The True Believer. That exactly sums up the appeal that Trump has. And as far as I know, this guy has not read Hoffer's book. I've mentioned it in the group several times, but he's never indicated that he was going to read it or has read it. But that is definitely the idea. That is why Avenatti is, in my personal opinion, probably going to get the nomination for the Democratic Party. Because Avenatti is is seen as somebody who is just as much a fighter as Trump is. And I know people out there will find that concerning, and I can certainly agree with that because, Avenatti lacks a lot of things like government experience to be an effective president. But, we burnt that bridge a long time ago. We are now, until things get a little sorted out, we are now in the era of the celebrity president. So Avenatti, who apparently has two women who claim they were attacked by Kavanaugh, is certainly perfectly poised to capture a lot of attention and snag the nomination. And, again, this isn't... And he's right about how the Republican, this poster that I'm talking about, he's right about how a lot of people see the Republicans as weak, which, let's face it, I rationally, you can't really call them weak when they control the House and the Senate and the White House, and they spent the better part of Obama's administration blocking everything of his that they could. But, the mindset of those people is that, well, Obama was, a Muslim-born Kenyan, blah, 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 and they didn't, get rid of him like they should have. So that's why they're seen as weak. And the Democrats are perceived as weak by a lot of people because they didn't fight harder for things that a lot of Americans believe in. They didn't, they fought for gay rights, but they weren't quite as bold as people would have liked in other areas. So, if you get somebody like Avenatti running, he will tap into, he'll get a portion of people who voted for Trump and now regret it, but he will inspire a larger portion of people who don't normally vote to actually come out and vote. That could be a good thing if, we get a lot of Democrats in Congress and Avenatti has a good vice presidential pick and has good people advising him. Will he do that? I have no way of knowing. And I don't know how strong his coattails will be if he runs, if he gets the nomination. We'll just have to see. That old Chinese saying come to mind. May you live in interesting times. Well, these times are certainly very interesting, and they're only going to get more interesting as it goes along. Okay, I need to get out of here because I got to edit this thing and get to bed. And next week will be, again, an Ethiopian Apocrypha episode. However, I should not be solo when I do that, thanks to that nice software update.
That's it for this episode of The Atheist in the Trailer Park Podcast. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, as well as just about anywhere else podcasts can be found. Many of the episodes are also on YouTube. Follow the show on Twitter. @TParkAtheist is the show's Twitter handle. It's on Facebook at facebook.com/trailerparkatheist.com. If you happen to like the podcast, please rate it on iTunes. If you'd like to support the podcast, there's a donate button on the show notes page. You can support it via Patreon at patreon.com/TNTucker. Thanks for listening.
Say goodnight, Fuzz-Nuts.
All I know is this violates every canon of respectable broadcasting.
Damned cat.